Let's get started. Story number 1.
I've been on the road most of my life. Long-haul trucking is what I know. And after 26 years of driving coast to coast, you get used to the strange, the lonely, and the downright unsettling. But there's one night I still can't shake. One route that never leaves me alone, no matter how many miles I put between me and that memory. It was the fall of 2014, and I was hauling a reefer load, frozen meat, from Yakima, Washington to Laredo, Texas. Tight schedule, but not impossible. I'd planned my stops, fueled up, had some caffeine pills on hand just in case I needed to push a few extra hours. Nothing out of the ordinary. The first couple of days went fine. Weather was clear, roads were smooth, and my rig was running like a dream. Then I hit the stretch of US 285 in New Mexico. If you've never driven 285 between Roswell and Carlsbad at night, count yourself lucky. It's 2-lane, no lights, barely any traffic, and flat open desert on both sides. The kind of place where your headlights feel like the only source of reality in a sea of black nothing. I'd driven it a few times before and always got a weird vibe, but this night was something else. I left Roswell around 9:30 p.m. The sun had long since gone down, and I figured I'd knock out the 90 miles to Carlsbad before pulling off at the Loves there to sleep a few hours. No music, just the hum of the engine and my thoughts keeping me company. About 30 minutes into the drive, I started noticing how dead the road felt. Not another pair of headlights in either direction. Not a single taillight ahead. No signs of civilization. Just sand, brush, and darkness. Then my CB crackled to life. "Anybody out there running southbound on 285? A man's voice asked. Deep calm with a strange edge to it, like he was trying to sound casual but wasn't pulling it off. I paused for a second. I hadn't heard anyone for hours. I picked up the mic. "Yeah, southbound out of Roswell. You stuck or something?" Static buzzed for a few seconds, then he came back. "You seen anything? Strange? Off the shoulder?" I frowned. "Like what?" "Anything that don't belong." The way he said it gave me a chill I didn't want to admit to. I thought maybe he meant debris or a wreck. Something practical. "Nope," I said. "Road's clear." Another long pause. Then, "Keep your eyes open, driver. Don't stop." Then silence. I tried calling back. "What do you mean, don't stop? You in trouble?" Nothing, just the hum of dead air. I drove another 10 miles, checking my mirrors, glancing at the ditches along the road. Nothing but blackness. It was past 10:30, and the wind had picked up, pushing little dust trails across the highway. My high beams caught shapes in the distance. Rocks, bushes, the occasional road sign. I tried to shake off the weirdness from the CB. Then I saw something. About a quarter mile ahead, just off the right shoulder, there was someone standing there. I slowed slightly, thinking it might be a broken-down motorist or a hitchhiker. But as I got closer, the details didn't make sense. It was a man, tall and still, facing the road, not waving, not moving at all, just standing there, arms stiff at his sides. I flipped on my brights. He didn't flinch. His clothes looked old, like 1950s old. A dark suit, white shirt, no tie. His skin was pale, almost gray, and even from inside the cab I could tell his eyes were wide open, staring at me. I passed him going 60, and as I looked in the mirror, I swear to God, he turned to face my truck. Just pivoted like a mannequin. No movement in the legs, just his upper body turning to watch me go. I gripped the wheel tighter, shaking my head. Maybe I was more tired than I realized. Maybe it was some local messing with drivers. People do stupid things. 5 minutes later, another figure. This time on the left side of the road, just outside the range of my brights. I couldn't see much, but I knew it was someone. Standing still. Watching. 10 minutes after that, another one. By now my scalp was tingling and every hair on my arm was on end. I started talking out loud to myself. Just tired, lack of sleep, brains making things up. Then the CB crackled again. "Still southbound?" It was the same voice. I hesitated, then picked up the mic. "Yeah, I'm seeing people. Figures by the road." "Don't stop," he said again. "Whatever you do, don't stop." "What the hell are they?" I asked. He didn't answer. Just silence. I pushed the truck a little harder, trying to get to Carlsbad quicker. The speed limit was 65, but I was doing 75. I didn't care. The night felt wrong. I started seeing more of them. Every few miles, another figure. All standing, all watching. Some were closer to the road. One of them looked like a child holding a teddy bear. I didn't look too hard, just kept driving. And then about 15 miles outside Carlsbad, my engine light came on, followed by the oil pressure warning. Then the truck began to sputter. No, 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 I muttered, hitting the dashboard. I'd done all my checks. The truck had been serviced the week before. This didn't make sense. I eased off the gas, trying to coast as far as I could. The engine cut completely. I had just enough momentum to roll to the side of the road. I sat in the cab, staring straight ahead. Everything outside the windshield was pitch black. My headlights were still on, illuminating the road and the shoulder ahead. I reached for my phone. No signal. CB was dead too. No static. Just silence. I turned off the headlights, then turned them back on. The moment I did, I saw a figure standing about 20 feet ahead of my truck, right in the beam. It was the man in the suit. He was closer now. I could see that his eyes were too wide and his mouth hung slightly open like he was mid-breath. He didn't move. I locked my doors, turned off the lights again. When I turned them back on, he was gone. Panic surged through me. I grabbed the flashlight from my glove box and checked my side mirrors. Nothing. I leaned forward to look at the road again. He was now at my driver's side door. I screamed and scrambled backward across the sleeper cab. The flashlight clattered to the floor. I heard tapping, soft, deliberate, on the glass. I didn't look. I don't know how long I stayed like that. Curled up behind the seats, holding my breath, staring at the sleeper curtain. The tapping stopped eventually, replaced by something worse. Silence. Then the truck rocked. Once. Twice. Like someone was climbing on it. I heard footsteps on the roof. Slow, deliberate. The metal flexed under the weight. I grabbed the flashlight and pointed it upward, even though I couldn't see through the roof. Then the footsteps stopped. Another few minutes passed. Then came a whisper, right at the edge of my hearing. I see you. It didn't come from outside. It came from inside the cab. I bolted forward, yanked the driver's door open, and jumped out. I didn't care what was out there. Anything was better than staying in that cab with whatever the hell that was. The night air was ice cold. I looked around. No one. No figures. No suited man, just the sound of the wind blowing sand across the asphalt. I checked the engine with my flashlight. No oil leak. Nothing out of place. I slammed the hood shut, climbed back in, and tried the ignition again. It roared to life like nothing had happened. I floored it, tearing down the road, not letting off until I saw the lights of Carlsbad in the distance. I pulled into the Love's lot, shut off the engine, and sat there with my head on the steering wheel, shaking. I never used that stretch of 285 again. I've rerouted every single trip since, no matter how far out of the way it takes me. I told a few other drivers about it. Most laughed. A couple got quiet. One old guy, been driving longer than me, said, "They're called the still ones. Some say they're echoes. Others say they're trapped souls, watching the road for someone to join them." He wouldn't say more. Years later, I still think about that night. I still wonder if I actually made it out. Sometimes when I drive past a mirror at night, I swear I see someone standing behind me in the reflection. Someone in a dark suit with wide eyes and a slack jaw, just watching. I never stop on the side of the road anymore. And I never, ever answer the CB after midnight unless I know the voice. Story the end.
Story number 2.
I've been driving trucks for going on 17 years now, mostly long hauls across the Midwest and into the Southwest. There's a rhythm to it. Kind of solitary peace when you're out on the road for hours with nothing but your rig and the hum of the tires against asphalt. But every now and then, something happens out there that rips away that sense of comfort and routine. Something that reminds you how much road there really is, how much space, how easy it is to get swallowed up in it. Back in late 2016, I was hauling a refrigerated load from Laredo, Texas, up to Denver, Colorado. It was a solo run, tight schedule. I had a full tank and had planned out a route that would take me through New Mexico overnight before climbing into Colorado by dawn. I'd done it before. Easy enough. I'd passed through Roswell around 11 p.m. Traffic was light, no weather to speak of, just that still, silent desert stretching for miles in every direction. I always keep my CB radio on, even if I'm not talking. You never know when someone's going to warn about roadkill, cops, or worse. That night it was dead quiet, no chatter, just the occasional crackle of static. About 30 miles north of Roswell, the first strange thing happened. I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror. a pair of them, low to the ground like a sedan or maybe a pickup. They were steady, following me, but not gaining. I kept checking back every few minutes. They stayed exactly the same distance. Not close enough to pass, not far enough to be casual. After maybe 20 minutes of that, I started to get irritated. I keyed the mic and said, "You planning to pass or just enjoy the view?" No response. A few more miles and I started to feel something else. Off. It wasn't just the car. It was the way the air inside my cab suddenly felt thick, like it was harder to breathe. I turned the AC down, thinking maybe I was imagining things. Maybe I was just tired. I'd been on the road for about 9 hours straight by then. Still, something didn't feel right. I decided to pull into a rest area, one of those barely lit gravel lots with a couple of picnic tables and an outhouse. I thought if the car was following me, it would pass me by. Let me see who was behind the wheel. But as I pulled off the highway, the headlights behind me blinked out, just like that. 1 second they were there, next they were gone. I stopped the truck and opened the door, standing out in the cold night air. Desert silence. Nothing but the ticking of my engine as it cooled. I walked a few steps into the lot, scanning the road behind me. Nothing. Not a single car. No headlights in either direction. I stood there for a minute, listening. My own breathing was loud. The wind was low, just brushing the tops of some dry bushes nearby. Then I heard it, something metallic, like chains being dragged, faint but distinct, coming from the shadows near the edge of the lot. My hand went instinctively to the tire iron I kept in the side compartment. I stood perfectly still. The sound continued. Slow, dragging. Then it stopped. I backed up to the truck and climbed back in, locking the door behind me. My heart was hammering. I waited there for a minute, headlights off, watching the rear view. Still nothing. When I finally started the engine and rolled back onto the road, I saw a shape in my mirrors. A figure. Thin. Tall. Standing just beyond the glow of my taillights in the gravel lot. Watching. I didn't sleep that night. I kept going, stopping only to piss once behind a diner in Vaughn. By the time I hit the mountains in northern New Mexico, the sun was just starting to come up. Pale pinks on the horizon, mist rising off the valley floor. I thought whatever happened was behind me. Just fatigue, I told myself. Maybe some weird local messing around. Then my rig lost power. It wasn't sudden. The lights dimmed, the engine sputtered, and the whole dash lit up with warning signals. I pulled over as far as I could onto the shoulder. No cell service, no GPS. My heart was already in my throat. I stepped out and popped the hood. I'm not a mechanic, but I know the basics. Nothing obvious was wrong. Belts intact, no leaks. The engine was warm, but it should have been. It had been running all night. I heard it again, that dragging chain sound. Only this time, it was much closer. I turned around, flashlight in hand. I scanned the woods that bordered the road. At first, I saw nothing, just pine and early morning fog curling through the trees. Then I caught movement, something shifting behind the tree line. "Who's there?" I shouted. My voice came out rough, too loud in the stillness. No answer. Then I saw it. The figure. Same height, same build, same pale face. But now I could see his eyes, wide and unfocused like he wasn't fully present. His mouth hung open slightly. He was maybe 30 feet away, just inside the trees. And in his hand, he was holding a length of chain. I stepped back toward the truck. "I don't want trouble, man," I said. He didn't move. Then, like a glitch in a video game, he was closer. Not walking. Just suddenly standing 10 feet nearer. I ran. Climbed into the cab and locked the door. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely turn the key. The engine coughed, then started. All the lights on the dash blinked once, then stabilized. I hit the gas, no sign of the man in the mirrors. But I didn't stop again until I crossed into Colorado. I called my dispatcher from a gas station outside Trinidad. Told him I was late, truck had mechanical issues. Left out the rest. But things didn't go back to normal. Not really. About a week later, I got home. I live in a small town outside of Amarillo. I was unloading laundry from the cab when I noticed something wedged under the passenger seat. I pulled it out. It was a link of chain, just one, heavy and cold. I don't keep chains in the cab. I threw it away. That night, I woke around 3 a.m. to the sound of metal scraping on the pavement outside. I live on a quiet cul-de-sac, no traffic. I looked out the window. No one was there. Next day, I installed security cameras. A few nights later, the footage caught something. 3:14 a.m. A tall figure walking slowly down the street, dragging something behind him. Chains. His face was too blurred to make out like the lens couldn't focus on him. He stopped right in front of my driveway, looked straight at the camera, then vanished. No jump cut, no walking away. Just gone. I left town for a week, stayed with a friend in Austin. When I came back, the cameras had all been disabled. Each one cut clean. The wires weren't chewed or frayed. They were sliced with precision. Inside my truck, on the driver's seat, was another chain link. I'm still driving, still hauling. It's my living. But I don't take routes through New Mexico anymore. I avoid that corridor between Roswell and the Colorado line like it's cursed. And maybe it is. I've talked to other drivers since then, quiet conversations at rest stops and trucker bars. I'm not the only one who's seen him. Some call him the Chain Man. Others say he's some kind of desert ghost, something that finds lonely drivers and marks them. Once you see him, you don't stop seeing him. He follows you, not every night, not even every month, but he never goes away. One driver told me he quit after his third sighting, parked his rig at a depot in Albuquerque and took a bus home, moved across the country. Still sees chain marks on his doorstep every now and then. Another guy swears he saw the Chain Man inside a truck stop once, just standing at the end of an aisle. When he tried to approach, the lights blew out and the whole building lost power. I used to think the road was the safest place I could be. Open space, no walls, no people. Just me and the machine. Now, every time I'm alone on the road, I check the mirrors more often than I used to. And sometimes, just sometimes, I catch a flicker of headlights that shouldn't be there, low to the ground, steady, never passing. And I don't look too long, because I know what's out there, and I know he's still watching. Story the end.
Story number 3.
The highway stretched out ahead of Tom in the deep hours before dawn, a ribbon of black asphalt cutting through the barren Nevada desert. He had been on the road for nearly 12 hours, hauling a refrigerated load of frozen seafood from Seattle down to Los Angeles. The miles were long, the nights cold, and the silence in his cab was broken only by the hum of the engine and the faint static of the CB radio. Tom was a seasoned trucker, 47 years old, with a face weathered by countless sunrises and long stretches of loneliness. He liked the solitude, the routine. The road was his home, and his 18-wheeler, his trusted companion. But tonight something felt off. He had passed through a tiny rest stop about 50 miles back. Just a single pump and a diner closed for the night. He had been the only rig there. Since then, the road had been empty, save for the occasional distant headlights that vanished as quickly as they appeared. The air inside the cab was chilly despite the heater running full blast, and Tom felt a persistent chill crawling up his spine. His CB radio suddenly crackled. The static was thick, but a voice emerged, low and distorted. "You're on the wrong road, friend." Tom froze. He hadn't heard a voice on the CB for hours, and this wasn't the usual trucker chatter. The voice was strange, almost mechanical, but with a hint of a whisper beneath it. "Who's this?" Tom answered cautiously. "Don't trust the signs. Don't follow the lights," the voice said, fading in and out. "Turn back before it's too late." The radio fell silent. Tom frowned, glanced in his mirrors, but the road behind was empty. He shook his head and continued. Maybe it was some prank or a malfunction. About 30 miles later, Tom noticed something odd. The GPS signal was flickering. The screen went blank for a few seconds, then popped back on with no route. He tried to reset it, but the device wouldn't respond. He glanced ahead and saw that the highway suddenly narrowed. The bright yellow lines marking the lanes faded into cracked pavement bordered by dense black desert brush. The signs had changed too, now warning of an old, abandoned mining town just a few miles ahead. Tom hadn't seen anything about that on the official route. Suddenly, the headlights of another truck appeared behind him, a big rig, similar in size, following closely. Tom slowed, expecting the driver to pass, but the other truck didn't move over. It stayed there just behind, its high beams locked on him. Tom flicked his lights on and off, but the other driver didn't react. Tom felt his pulse quicken. The road was empty except for these two trucks, and the night was pressing in. The CB radio crackled again. "Don't stop. Don't look back. It waits." Tom's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. "Wait. What's waiting?" he asked into the mic. No answer, only static. Suddenly, the radio burst with a shrill, high-pitched noise, then silence. His windshield wipers jerked uncontrollably. He slammed on the brakes, but the rig skidded on loose gravel, veering off the road onto a narrow dirt path leading toward the brush. Tom fought to keep control, and after what felt like an eternity, the truck came to a stop near a broken-down fence. He killed the engine and sat breath-heavy, trying to calm his nerves. Then he heard it. A soft tapping, like fingernails on metal, coming from the back of the trailer. His heart hammered in his chest. The trailer doors were closed and locked, and the load was sealed. But the noise persisted. He grabbed his flashlight and climbed down from the cab, stepping onto the dusty ground. The cold night air hit him hard, and the silence was oppressive. He circled the trailer, shining his light on the doors. Nothing. The tapping stopped. Tom took a step back and shone his light toward the woods nearby. At the edge of the trees, a figure stood, tall, thin, with a pale face that glistened under the moonlight. It didn't move. It didn't blink. It just stared. Tom swallowed hard and hurried back into the cab, slamming the door behind him. His hands trembled as he tried to start the engine. Nothing. The dashboard lights flickered, then died. He tried again. Still dead. The radio sputtered to life again. "Run," the voice whispered. Tom's breath caught in his throat. The figure at the tree line stepped forward. It moved impossibly fast. One moment it was there. The next, it was in the headlights, inches from the cab. Tom slammed the door locked and frantically reached for his phone. No signal. He slammed his fists against the steering wheel, heart racing. The figure began tapping on the window, slow and deliberate. Tom screamed and twisted the key. The engine roared. He gunned the truck forward, tires kicking up dust as he sped back onto the highway. Behind him, he saw it. The other truck, but now it was empty. No driver, just the rig rolling along the shoulder. Tom never took that route again. He sticks to the interstate now, keeps his radio off, and never stops at lonely rest areas after dark. Because sometimes on the road, you're not just alone, there's something waiting, watching, tapping, and it's hungry. Story the end.
Story number 4.
I was hauling a refrigerated load from Oregon to South Dakota in the fall of 2018, a routine run most truckers wouldn't bat an eye at. The kind of route where the days blur into each other with nothing but highway, radio static, and the dull hum of the engine. I'd been on the road for about 18 hours when the strangest thing happened, something that still messes with me whenever I think about it. The load was frozen seafood, sealed tight in a reefer trailer, and the plan was to push through the night and make the drop early the next day. I was about halfway through Wyoming, driving down a stretch of Interstate 90 that cuts through endless stretches of barren prairie and low hills. It was late October, and the air was crisp and biting cold. The stars were bright but distant, and the only other signs of life were the occasional blinking taillights of cars or other trucks miles ahead or behind me. At about 2 a.m., I stopped at a rest area just east of Buffalo, Wyoming. It was one of those spots where the asphalt lot seemed to go on forever, bordered by tall, scraggly trees that looked more like dark shadows against the moonlight than anything else. I pulled in, did my usual checks, the tires, the reefer unit, and the paperwork, and decided to grab a quick bite from the back of my cab. I locked the doors and turned off the engine, ready for a quick rest. That's when I first heard it. It was faint at first, like a whisper carried on the wind, but unmistakably coming from the trailer. A soft thumping, thump, thump, thump. A slow, deliberate knocking sound, like someone tapping their fingers against the metal wall. I froze, every hair on my neck standing on end. I turned the cab lights on and peered into the side mirrors. The trailer looked the same, silent and still. I convinced myself it was just the wind or maybe the cooling unit cycling, but the sound didn't stop. It got louder, more rhythmic. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled as I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. The cold hit me immediately, and the smell, oh God, the smell, was like nothing I'd ever experienced. It wasn't the usual diesel or the faint scent of road dust. This was a deep, sour stench, almost metallic, mixed with the sharp tang of something decayed. I crept around to the back of the trailer and shone my flashlight over the doors. The knocking stopped the instant I got close. I leaned in and pressed my ear to the cold metal, trying to listen. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, so faint I almost doubted my own senses, a voice whispered, "Help." It was cracked, hoarse, like someone who'd been screaming for hours and lost their voice. The words echoed in my head long after I stepped away from the trailer. I bolted back to the cab, locked the doors, and tried the radio. Static. No channels. No response. My phone? Dead zone. No bars. No signal. Nothing but the dull hum of the reefer unit and my own ragged breathing. I sat there, gripping the wheel, trying to make sense of what I'd heard. After what felt like hours, I finally gave in to exhaustion and shut my eyes. That's when I woke up to screaming. It was coming from the trailer. Piercing, guttural, bone-chilling screams that echoed through the night air. I slammed my eyes open and looked around, heart pounding so hard it felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. The engine was still off. The parking lot was deserted. The only light came from a flickering street lamp on the far side of the lot. I reached for my flashlight again and aimed it toward the trailer doors. They were shaking violently. The metal walls flexed as if something huge was thrashing inside. The reefer unit's green light flickered, then went out. Panic surged through me. I fumbled for the truck keys, hit the ignition, and the engine roared to life. The noises inside the trailer escalated, knocks, bangs, and a scraping sound like nails dragging across steel. I threw the truck into reverse and peeled out of the rest area, tires squealing on the asphalt. As I merged back onto the interstate, the sounds followed me, growing louder until they reached a crescendo. Then, silence. I kept driving, gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. The reefer unit hummed back to life, and the trailer's temperature gauge slowly climbed back to normal. But the smell stayed with me. No matter how much air I blasted through the cab's vents, it lingered, a sour, iron-tinged odor that settled deep into my lungs. When I reached the warehouse in South Dakota the next afternoon, I was exhausted and jittery. The dock workers noticed my pallor and the sweat on my brow, even though the temperature was cold. One of them, an older guy with a weathered face, asked if I was okay. I nodded but didn't say much. I signed off the paperwork and left as fast as I could. Weeks later, I heard the rumors. The load I'd hauled was never delivered intact. The warehouse crew found the trailer doors forced open when they went to unload it. Inside, they discovered the frozen seafood had been smashed to bits, and strange claw marks covered the walls and floor. The smell had been so overwhelming that some workers became sick and had to leave. But the worst part? They found strange, unidentifiable footprints in the melted blood pooling inside the trailer. The footprints weren't human. They were elongated with sharp claws and an awkward gait. Nobody wanted to touch the trailer after that. The company had it towed away and never used that refrigerated unit again. I quit that route shortly after. Some nights when I'm parked alone, I swear I hear scratching on my trailer doors. Soft, almost begging. And the smell? It comes back sometimes, especially when I open the fridge in my cab. I've never told anyone this story in full. Most wouldn't believe me anyway, but it's why I always check the load before I haul. Because sometimes what's inside the trailer isn't just cargo. It's something else entirely. Story the end.
Story number 5.
The sun had just dipped below the horizon when I pulled out of the loading dock in western Texas. I was hauling a refrigerated trailer filled with frozen produce, a pretty routine run from El Paso to Oklahoma City. It was late March. The weather was clearing up after a week of storms, and I was looking forward to a smooth overnight drive with minimal traffic. The highway stretched ahead of me like an endless ribbon, and I settled in behind the wheel for what should have been a straightforward trip. I'd been driving trucks for nearly a decade by then, plenty of time to get used to the solitude and the weirdness that sometimes comes with long hours on the road. I'd seen strange things before. Lights flashing in the distance that weren't from any town, unexplainable shadows that darted just outside my headlights, but nothing that ever really scared me. That night, though, would change all that. About 2 hours out of El Paso, I took the usual break at a rest stop near Van Horn. It was quiet, only a few rigs parked alongside mine. I stepped out to stretch, took a quick walk around the truck, and grabbed a cup of black coffee from the vending machine. The air was cool but dry, and the stars were bright, scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. I noticed an older man leaning against a battered pickup across the parking lot. He looked like he'd been out here a while, worn jeans, a weather-beaten jacket, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. His face was mostly shadowed, but I caught a glimpse of gray stubble and tired eyes. When I nodded, he nodded back, but didn't say a word. I didn't think much of it at the time. Truckers are a quiet breed, especially out here in the middle of nowhere. After a 30-minute rest, I climbed back into the cab and hit the highway again. I made good time, rolling through the sparse towns of Culberson and Pecos. I was focused, making sure to keep my speed steady and eyes peeled for any signs of trouble. By the time I reached the outskirts of Midland around midnight, the sky had thickened with clouds and a faint mist was starting to settle on the asphalt. The stretch between Midland and Big Spring is mostly empty plains and oil fields. At night, it can get eerie, silent, except for the low hum of the engine and the occasional owl hooting somewhere off in the distance. Around 12:30 a.m., just past a faded exit sign for Stanton, I saw it. At first, it was just a flicker in the distance, something on the side of the road, maybe a figure. I squinted through the windshield, adjusting my speed and scanning for movement. The fog was growing thicker, the mist swirling in the beams of my headlights. A chill crawled down my spine. The figure came into focus. A woman standing on the shoulder, motionless, wearing a long white dress that looked soaked and dirty. Her hair was tangled and hanging down, obscuring her face. She didn't move as I passed by, didn't even turn her head. I slowed down, heart pounding. Something about the way she stood, too still, too rigid, made me grip the steering wheel tighter. I passed her, keeping my eyes locked in the rearview mirror. She was still there, staring after me. I took the next exit, hoping to put distance between us. The radio buzzed, crackling with static, then faded into silence. No music, no trucker chatter, just dead air. I fumbled with the knobs, switching channels, but nothing came through. My cell phone signal was weak, no bars. My skin prickled with unease. A few miles down the road, the fog thickened even more. It crept over the pavement, swirling in ghostly tendrils that licked the edges of the trailer. Visibility dropped to maybe 20 feet. I slowed to 40 miles per hour, turning on the hazard lights. Then I saw them. More figures. They appeared out of the fog on both sides of the highway. Men and women, all standing still, all dressed in old-fashioned clothes, some in faded suits and hats, others in dresses like the woman I'd seen earlier. Their faces were blank, pale, and expressionless. Their eyes glowed faintly in the beam of my headlights. I slammed on the brakes, heart racing, and the rig skidded slightly on the slick asphalt. My radio remained dead. The engine roared as I tried to back up, but the trailer fishtailed dangerously. The figures didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there like statues. I slammed the truck into drive and floored the accelerator, aiming for a patch of open road ahead. The fog clung to the wheels, the trailer rocking as I sped through the ghostly crowd. I glanced in the side mirror. Dozens of figures were still standing at the roadside, their faces now twisted into faint, sorrowful smiles. I nearly swerved off the road. Somewhere in the distance, I heard a low, mournful wail, a sound like the wind mixed with a woman's crying. I pushed forward, eyes tearing, breath shallow. The fog finally began to thin as I approached the outskirts of Big Spring, and the figures faded away like smoke. When I pulled into the truck stop in Big Spring, I sat in the cab trembling, staring at the rearview mirror. The radio crackled back to life with a sudden burst of static, then a voice. "Did you see them? The lost souls on the highway? Keep driving. Don't stop. Don't look back." I almost dropped the mic. The voice was distorted, but definitely human. I called out, "Who is this? What's going on?" Static, then silence. I shut off the radio, took deep breaths, and decided to call the dispatcher. My phone was working again. I told him what happened. He didn't say much at first. Then he said, "You probably drove through the stretch people call Dead Man's Hollow." I laughed nervously. "I've never heard of that. Where is it?" He hesitated. "It's an old stretch of highway between Midland and Big Spring. There was a terrible accident there decades ago. An entire bus full of passengers wiped out. They say the spirits never left." I shrugged it off, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd come face to face with something not of this world. The rest of the trip passed without incident, but I slept very little the next few nights. I couldn't forget those faceless figures or the woman in white. Back home, I looked up the history. In 1968, a charter bus carrying oil field workers crashed on that highway, killing everyone aboard. Locals still tell stories of strange sightings and eerie voices near the site. Since then, I never take that route after dark. I make sure my radio works, and if the fog rolls in thick, I pull off or find a safe place to wait it out. I've shared this story with a few other truckers. Some have laughed, some have nodded knowingly. A couple admitted they'd seen the same things, but never told anyone. I'm not a superstitious man, but after that night, I'm convinced some roads aren't meant to be traveled alone, especially in the dead of night when the fog rises and the lost souls wander. I still drive, I still love the road, but I've learned to respect what lurks beyond the headlights. Story the end.
Story number 6.
The desert was a vast, unending stretch of black under the night sky, and I was alone with it, driving my rig down a long stretch of highway in New Mexico. I'd been a trucker for nearly 15 years by then, and I thought I'd seen it all. Bad weather, crazy drivers, and the kind of loneliness that gnaws at you on these endless roads. But that night, something happened that still haunts me. I don't usually talk about it. Hell, I don't even talk about it much to my closest friends. But it's true, and if you drive long and far enough, you might hear about similar stories. I was hauling a load of machinery parts from Dallas up to Denver. It was late August, and the heat from the day still lingered in the air even as the sun dipped below the horizon. I'd left Amarillo hours earlier and had been driving through miles of nothing but dry, dusty flatland. My plan was to make it all the way to a truck stop near Santa Fe before I took my mandatory break. It was around midnight when I realized something was off. I was on a stretch of 2-lane highway, the kind where you can see headlights in the distance for miles and nothing but the dark, dark desert beyond. My radio was silent, except for static. I tried flipping through channels, but nothing was coming through. No other trucks, no voices, just that buzzing white noise and my own breathing. Suddenly, I saw something on the side of the road up ahead, a figure. At first, I thought it was just a hitchhiker. Not a good idea these days, but sometimes when you're out there so long, you almost forget people still walk alongside highways at night. I slowed down as I got closer, peering through the windshield. It was a man, standing by the shoulder. He looked ragged, dirty clothes, and he was holding something in his hand, but I couldn't tell what. I rolled my window down a bit and called out, "Hey, you need help?" The man didn't respond. He didn't even look at me. He just stood there, staring straight ahead, as if he was looking through the truck rather than at it. I felt a knot form in my stomach. Something wasn't right. I started to pull over onto the shoulder to check on him. Just as I was braking, he suddenly stepped forward, right into the road. I slammed on the brakes hard, the truck's weight pushing me forward even as I tried to stop. My tires screeched against the pavement. The headlights lit up his face for a split second before I swerved sharply to avoid him. His face, God, I'll never forget it. It was pale and gaunt, but his eyes, they were sunken and completely black. No whites. Just 2 holes of darkness staring back at me, filled with something I couldn't put into words. I didn't look back as I sped past him, my heart pounding in my chest. I kept driving, but couldn't shake the image. The man was still standing in the middle of the road, perfectly still as I disappeared into the darkness. A few minutes later, I pulled off at a rest stop to catch my breath and check the truck. I called dispatch, told them what happened. They told me to keep moving, not to stop or pick anyone up. I agreed, even though part of me wanted to go back and see if the guy needed help. After I left the rest stop, things got worse. The radio, which had been silent for hours, suddenly crackled with a voice. It was faint at first, barely audible over the static. Then it grew louder. "Turn back." That was all it said. Just those 2 words. Then the static swallowed the voice again. I switched channels, fiddled with the knobs, but every station seemed to broadcast the same message, over and over. "Turn back." I tried calling dispatch, but the radio was dead. No signal. My phone? No service. The desert swallowed all my connections. I felt my skin crawl. I glanced in the side mirrors. The highway stretched behind me, empty. Up ahead, the road curved into a tight bend surrounded by scrub and rocks. As I approached, I thought I saw headlights behind me. I sped up, heart hammering. The headlights followed. Faster. Closer. I floored the accelerator, pushing the rig past 70 miles per hour faster than I was comfortable with, but the rig handled it. I had to shake whoever was behind me. The lights kept coming. Then suddenly, they were gone. I slowed down, checked my mirrors again. Empty, no sign of the vehicle. I laughed nervously, telling myself it was a trick of the light, maybe a reflection, but I couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched. Then the truck's engine started to sputter. I pulled off to the shoulder and tried to restart it. Nothing. I popped the hood and checked the engine. Everything looked normal, but I couldn't get the engine to turn over. The desert wind kicked up, rattling the truck's frame. I was miles from anywhere, no cell signal, no other cars. I knew I was vulnerable. I climbed back into the cab and sat, gripping the steering wheel. Then the knocking started, soft, rhythmic tapping on the passenger window. I turned toward the sound. No one there. I wiped the glass, thinking maybe a branch was hitting it. Nothing. Then, the knocking came from the back of the trailer. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out, the desert night cold against my sweat. I shone the light down the length of the trailer. Nothing. No animals, no people. I was about to get back in when I noticed footprints in the dirt beside the trailer. They were large, maybe a size 13 or 14, and they seemed to lead toward the back door. But here's the thing. The trailer doors were locked tight. I never leave them unlocked, especially with a valuable load. I checked the lock, still secure. I took a breath and started walking down the road, flashlight scanning the brush, hoping to find someone to help. Then a scream echoed across the desert. It was a woman's voice, sharp and terrified. I froze. The voice came from nowhere and everywhere all at once, echoing against the distant hills. I ran back to my truck, jumped inside, and locked every door. I called dispatch again. No answer. The radio crackled once more, whispering, "Leave now." I sat there, frozen. Minutes passed like hours. Then the engine roared back to life. I slammed it into gear and peeled out of there. The whole way back to the highway, I kept glancing into my mirrors. I thought I saw shadows moving just at the edge of my headlights. Figures in white, flickering like ghosts. When I finally got back to the interstate and cell service, I called the local police to report what happened. They told me the stretch of highway I'd been on had a reputation. Years ago, there was a family who'd gotten stranded there during a storm. Their truck caught fire, and they all died. Since then, there had been sightings of people standing on the road, warning drivers to turn back. Most drivers just ignore them. Some say the spirits get angry. I don't know what I saw that night. I don't know if the man on the road was real or some kind of apparition, but I know what I heard, and I know what I felt. The desert doesn't forgive. The road doesn't forget. And sometimes when you're out there living alone through the night, the past reaches out for you. I don't take that highway anymore because I learned the hard way. Some journeys don't want to be finished. Story, the end.
Story number 7.
The desert at night isn't like the day. It's not just the blackness swallowing the horizon or the way the stars seem sharper, colder. It's something deeper, something that settles in your gut the longer you drive through it alone. I've driven these roads more times than I can count, hauling loads that take me through the vast emptiness of the Southwest, but that night changed everything. I still think about it years later, and every time I'm on that stretch of highway, I'm watching the shadows a little more closely. I was running a route from Phoenix to Dallas, loaded with electronics, flat-screen TVs, and a bunch of other fragile gear. The shipment was urgent, and I had a tight schedule. The company pushed me to keep rolling overnight. I was fine with it. I prefer night driving, less traffic, and the hum of the engine keeps me focused. I was westbound on I-10, somewhere near Benson, Arizona, just past midnight. The desert air was crisp through my cracked window, the kind of cold that makes your skin prickle. The radio was tuned to some classic country station, the DJ's voice low and calm. I'd been driving for nearly 6 hours straight, no rest yet. The road was mostly empty, a few other trucks spaced miles apart. I was cruising at about 65 miles per hour, hands steady on the wheel. Suddenly, my CB radio crackled to life with static. Then a voice came through. "You gotta stop, pull off. Don't ignore it." The voice was frantic, panicked even, but I didn't recognize it. "Who is this?" I keyed the mic, but no reply, just static. I figured some guy messing around or maybe another driver trying to spook the newbies. I shook it off and kept driving. A few miles later, my radio went dead. Not just static, dead as if it had shut off. I fiddled with the knobs, tried changing channels. Nothing. I checked my phone. No signal. That was odd, but not unheard of out there. Then the headlights appeared. Far in the distance, coming toward me on the opposite side of the highway, a pair of bright lights that looked like car headlights. But something about them was off. As the lights approached, they didn't move like a vehicle. No acceleration or deceleration. They stayed at the same speed, steady, like they were floating above the ground. The first thing that got my attention was that the lights didn't blink. No beams cutting through the night. Just two bright orbs glowing steadily in the dark. As they drew closer, I noticed something else. The lights weren't moving on the road. They were about 10 feet above the asphalt, hovering. I slowed down, heart pounding. I couldn't explain why, but every instinct screamed to stop, to get the hell out of there. I flipped on my high beams, and as the light hit the orbs, they vanished. Just like that, gone. No fading, no dimming, nothing. They were just gone. I rubbed my eyes, blinking hard. Was I hallucinating? The desert can play tricks on you after hours of driving. My rig's engine started sputtering. The RPMs dropped, and I lost power. I pulled over to the shoulder. The engine died. I tried to restart it, but nothing. The dashboard lights flickered once, then went dark. I sat there in the silence, the desert night closing in around me. My phone still had no signal. I felt exposed. The only light came from the moon, which was hidden behind a thin veil of clouds. I got out to check under the hood. The air was heavy and cold, but I didn't hear any animals or the usual desert sounds. No coyotes, no wind. I noticed tracks in the dirt next to my tires. At first, I thought it was just the gravel being disturbed, but then I saw them more clearly. They were footprints. Not car or tire tracks, but bare human footprints. Fresh. Leading up to the side of my truck, I looked around, but the desert was empty. Suddenly, I heard a low scraping sound behind me, like chains dragged across pavement. My skin crawled. I spun around. There was nothing there. I climbed back into the cab, locking the doors. I sat frozen, listening. The scraping noise grew louder, circling the truck slowly. It wasn't constant. It came and went in bursts. I flicked on the cab lights and peered through the windows. Nothing in sight. I tried the CB radio again. Static. Then, without warning, the scraping stopped. I started the engine again. It fired up, hesitating but alive. I eased back onto the highway, hands trembling. As I drove, the headlights reappeared. This time, they were behind me. The lights stayed a few hundred yards back, moving slowly but never catching up. I sped up. They matched my speed. I slowed down. They did too. I was trapped in some kind of game, and I didn't like it. Then, just as suddenly as they appeared, the lights blinked out. I glanced in my side mirrors. I couldn't see them, but I saw something else, a figure standing at the edge of the highway, silhouetted against the faint glow of a distant town. It was a man, tall and thin. He wore a long coat, the collar turned up against the cold. His hands were hanging at his sides, but his fingers looked too long, too sharp. His face was hidden in shadow. I slowed to a crawl, heart hammering in my chest. He didn't move. I flipped on my high beams again. His face was there, pale, almost translucent, eyes completely black. I slammed my foot on the gas and blasted past him. The radio flickered to life for a moment, crackling with a voice I couldn't understand. It wasn't English or any language I knew. It was a low, guttural whisper, like the sound was coming from deep underground. My heart pounded so hard I thought I'd pass out. The rest of the drive to Dallas was a blur. I didn't stop. I barely spoke on the radio. Every shadow in the night seemed to stretch toward me. When I finally pulled into the warehouse, I was shaking so badly my hands couldn't grip the steering wheel properly. I told the dispatcher I'd had engine trouble and needed the truck checked. They put me on a replacement rig for the next haul. I tried to explain what happened to a few other drivers, but most laughed it off as road fatigue or hallucinations. But I know what I saw. That figure, those headlights, the voice on the radio, they weren't hallucinations. The next day, the company mechanic told me they found no issues with the engine. Everything was running perfectly, except for one thing. When they inspected the tires, they found deep scratches on the sidewalls, like something had tried to claw its way through. I never got a clear explanation. A few weeks later, a local newspaper reported a trucker went missing on I-10 near Benson. His rig was found abandoned, doors open but no sign of him anywhere. No footprints, no clues. They never found him. I still drive, but I avoid that stretch of I-10 whenever I can. Sometimes, when I'm alone on a dark highway, I hear the scraping sound again, chains dragged across asphalt, and sometimes, just sometimes, I see those headlights hovering in the distance. Waiting. Watching. Story the end.
Story number 8.
I'd been driving trucks for over a decade before I ever ran into something that genuinely shook me to my core. I'm talking about the kind of thing that makes you question what you think you know about the world, about reality itself. It wasn't some urban legend or roadside ghost story. This was real. It happened on a cold October night in 2017, somewhere along Interstate 80, crossing through Nebraska. I was on a night run, hauling a dry freight trailer full of electronics from Salt Lake City to Chicago. A pretty standard load, mostly nothing fragile or perishable, just expensive stuff crated tight and stacked high. The route was a long haul, about 1,400 miles, and the plan was to push through the night, stop for a quick break at a rest area somewhere near Kearney, Nebraska, then keep trucking until I reached the drop-off early next morning. I left Salt Lake City in the late afternoon, the sun just starting to dip behind the mountains. The air was crisp and smelled faintly of burning wood from some distant campfires. I was in a good groove. Engine humming, favorite country station playing softly through the cab speakers, and the road open ahead. The first 8 hours were uneventful. The highway stretched out before me like an endless ribbon, the only lights the occasional roadside sign or distant vehicle. At about 11:30 p.m., just past North Platte, I pulled into a small rest area that was little more than a gravel lot with a handful of picnic tables and porta potties. It was dead quiet except for the hum of my truck's engine idling. I parked in a corner spot near the trees, locked everything up, and stepped out into the cold night air. The place had that eerie stillness typical of isolated rest stops late at night, the kind of silence that feels heavy, like the world's holding its breath. I stretched my legs, took a few deep breaths, and pulled my jacket tighter around me. I always keep a flashlight in my cab, so I grabbed it and decided to walk around the perimeter, just to clear my head. The moon was nearly full, casting long shadows through the skeletal branches of the trees. As I rounded the trailer, I caught sight of something odd. Faint footprints in the gravel leading from the edge of the parking lot toward the woods. They weren't fresh, but they also didn't look old, almost like they'd been made recently but had been partially washed away by an earlier rain. I crouched down and looked closer. The footprints were strange. Too big to be human, and the shape was off. The heel was narrow, but the toes were long and curved like claws. I stood up quick, my heart picking up. Maybe I'd just been out too long or seeing things. I shook it off and headed back to the cab. But as I climbed inside and closed the door, I noticed the truck felt colder than usual, despite the heater running full blast. I shrugged it off and started the engine, preparing to leave the rest area. Then, just as I shifted into gear, I heard a faint tapping coming from the back of the trailer. Tap, tap, tap. I froze and turned off the engine, the tapping growing louder. I opened the door and shined my flashlight down the side of the trailer. Nothing. I circled around again, and the sound seemed to follow me, always just behind the trailer doors. I checked the seals, the locks, and the hinges. Everything was intact. The air smelled strange, like wet earth and something rotten. I climbed back into the cab and called dispatch, but there was no answer. Just static. I pulled out my phone to check for signal. Dead zone. I was cut off. That's when I heard the whispering, soft like breath against my ear. I spun around with the flashlight, shining into the dark trees, but nothing moved. The whispering grew louder, unintelligible words that seemed to scrape at my mind. I slammed the door and locked it, trying to control my breathing. The tapping on the trailer turned into pounding, fist-sized hits, steady and deliberate. I panicked and decided to leave. I started the truck and peeled out of the rest area as fast as I dared, the pounding continuing behind me until the trailer doors suddenly went silent. The next several hours were a blur. I kept glancing in the mirrors, half expecting to see something chasing me. The temperature inside the trailer dropped suddenly, and frost started forming on the back doors. When I finally reached the warehouse in Chicago and opened the trailer, what I found made my blood run cold. All the crates were shredded from the inside out. Something had torn through the cargo with nails or claws. There were streaks of dark, coagulated liquid smeared across the floor. And among the wreckage, a single large footprint, clawed and inhuman, pressed into the frozen dirt still clinging to the trailer floor. No one else believed me. The company said it was animal damage, probably raccoons or something, but I knew better. I never took that route again. And every time I'm alone at night, I swear I can still hear the tapping. Story the end.
Story number 9.
The desert night was cold, the kind of cold that seeps through even the thickest jacket and settles into your bones. Jeff Miller had been driving the interstate for over 2 decades, hauling everything from electronics to livestock, and he thought he'd seen it all. But the run he was on now, heading east on I-10 through Arizona, was different. It was one of those stretches of highway where the miles stretch into infinity, and the silence feels so heavy it presses on your chest. Jeff's rig was a big Freightliner with a refrigerated trailer full of frozen chicken. He'd left Los Angeles late the previous afternoon, aiming to reach Dallas in time for a delivery window. The roads had been clear, the trip uneventful, and Jeff was feeling good as he rolled past the last gas stop before a long dry stretch. It was close to midnight when the strange things started happening. First, there was the radio interference. Jeff flicked the CB on to check for traffic updates, but instead of chatter, all he got was a low, static hum mixed with an eerie whisper. He frowned and fiddled with the knobs, trying to clear the channel, but the whisper only grew louder, seeming to swirl inside the cab. "Get off the road," the voice hissed softly, barely audible but unmistakable. Jeff shook his head. "Must be some prank or a glitch," he muttered, flipping the radio off. He tried to focus on the road ahead, the lines painted white and yellow stretching endlessly into the dark. Then came the lights. At first, they were just distant headlights, 2 pinpricks of brightness far behind him, slowly gaining ground. Jeff glanced in the mirrors. Nothing unusual, no other rigs nearby, just the empty highway. The headlights disappeared suddenly, only to reappear a minute later, closer, brighter, and not quite right. They didn't belong to any vehicle Jeff had seen before. No shapes followed the beams, just an intense, cold glow that seemed to swallow the darkness. It felt like something was watching him, moving with him, but impossible to catch. Jeff's grip tightened on the wheel. He tried to shrug off the feeling, but the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. Then the truck shuddered. The engine coughed and died. Jeff cursed, pulling the rig to the shoulder. His heart pounded as he tried to restart, but the engine only wheezed and fell silent. He grabbed his flashlight and climbed down, the cold night air shocking his skin. He circled the truck, checking the engine compartment. Nothing wrong, no leaks, no visible damage. The lights behind him blinked on again, that same eerie glow, closer now, as if the highway itself had eyes. He turned toward the source. A figure stood on the edge of the road. Tall, impossibly thin, with glowing eyes and skin pale as bone. It didn't move, but the heat of its gaze felt like ice. The figure's mouth opened wide in a silent scream, but no sound came out. Jeff stumbled back into the cab and locked the doors, slamming his hands on the ignition. The engine roared to life. He looked in the rearview mirrors. No sign of the figure. The lights vanished. Jeff hit the gas hard, tires spinning on the gravel as he re-entered the highway. But something was wrong. The GPS was dead, the screen blank. The radio sparked back to life. "Turn back," the whisper urged, "or you'll never leave." Jeff's breath caught. He pushed onward, his headlights cutting through the darkness. The miles ticked by slowly, each one heavier than the last. Suddenly a shadow darted across the road, a shape that moved too fast to be human. Jeff swerved to avoid it, the rig fishtailing dangerously. His heart raced. He glanced again in the mirrors. The shadow was there, but now it was closer, standing on the shoulder, watching. The cold creeping into the cab deepened. Jeff's vision blurred, fatigue crashing down. His mind screamed at him to stop, but the voice on the radio urged him to keep going. Hours later, he rolled into a small town, his rig battered, his nerves shredded. He found a mechanic who fixed the engine and handed Jeff a coffee without asking questions. Jeff refused to say anything about what he'd seen. He knew no one would believe him. Back on the road, the lights never followed him again. But sometimes when the night is still and the highway is empty, Jeff swears he hears tapping on the side of his trailer. Soft, slow, deliberate, and a whisper in the static, "You can't run." Story the end.
Story number 10.
Driving a big rig isn't just a job, it's a lifestyle. After 15 years of hauling everything from gravel to refrigerated goods, I've been through my share of weird nights on the road. Strange noises, odd encounters at rest stops, eerie feelings. You get used to the unnerving side of life out there. But one trip back in late fall of 2017 still haunts me in a way nothing else ever did. I was hauling a load of auto parts from Atlanta up to Chicago. It was supposed to be a standard, no-nonsense run. The cargo wasn't sensitive, the weather was dry and cool, and I had a schedule that allowed me to take my time, which is rare these days. I left Atlanta mid-afternoon and cruised through Georgia and Tennessee without incident. By the time I hit the Ohio border, the sun had set, and the sky was pitch black, except for the occasional twinkle of stars and the headlights cutting through the darkness. I always prefer to drive the interstate, but on this route, a detour sent me onto a stretch of U.S. Highway 52 through rural Ohio. The GPS warned of construction delays on I-75 ahead, so I decided to take the alternative. That decision would come back to haunt me. The road was narrow and winding, flanked by dense woods and open fields that seemed to vanish into the night. Not a soul was around except me. The only sounds were the steady thrum of my engine and the occasional rustle of wildlife near the roadside. After about an hour on 52, I stopped at a small truck stop just outside a town called Riverside. It was one of those dimly lit, sleepy places with one pump, a mini-mart, and a few parking spots for rigs. I filled up, grabbed a coffee, and decided to rest in the sleeper for a bit. It was just past midnight. I wasn't asleep for more than 20 minutes when a soft knock came at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, especially at this hour, so I cracked the door open a sliver, keeping the chain on. A man stood there, maybe mid-30s, tall, with a worn leather jacket and an old baseball cap. His face was pale and gaunt, with deep-set eyes that seemed tired but desperate. I asked if he needed help. "I'm lost," he said quietly. "Can you give me a ride? Just for a few miles, please?" I hesitated. Out here, you have to be careful. Stories about truckers picking up hitchhikers who turn out to be trouble are common, and I'm no fool. But there was something about this guy that unsettled me in a way I can't explain. "Sorry, man, I can't," I said. "Company rules. Plus, I don't know you." He nodded, shoulders slumped. "I understand." He turned to leave, but then looked back. "If you see her, don't stop." That gave me chills. "Who?" He didn't answer and just walked into the shadows. I locked the door and sat back down, heart racing. I debated calling the police, but figured he'd moved on. I shrugged it off as some drunk guy looking for a ride. I got back on the road. The highway stretched out long and empty. As I passed the town sign for Riverside, the fog started rolling in. At first, it was thin, a light mist clinging to the grass, but quickly it thickened, swirling in sheets that obscured the road and reduced visibility to less than 50 feet. I slowed down, turned on my low beams, and watched carefully. The fog was almost unnatural. It had this sickly gray-green tint to it that made the world look warped. That's when I saw her. At the edge of the fog, just at the shoulder, a woman stood. Pale in a long white dress that looked old-fashioned and tattered, her hair was long and wet, plastered to her face. Her eyes were hollow and dark. I froze. Something told me to keep driving, but I slammed on the brakes instead, my heart hammering. "Hey," I called out. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" She didn't move, didn't blink, just stared. Then the headlights caught something more. Her mouth was twisted into a frozen scream, or maybe she was just mouthing words I couldn't hear. She slowly lifted one hand and pointed down the road behind me. I glanced in the mirrors. Nothing there. No other cars. Just endless fog and darkness. I swallowed hard and eased forward, trying to keep my hands steady. Suddenly, the engine sputtered and died. I slammed my fist on the dashboard. No power. The gauges all went dark. The truck was completely dead. Panic crept in as the fog thickened around me, pressing in like a living thing. I reached for my phone. No signal. I tried the ignition again. Nothing. I was stuck. The woman's figure began to step onto the road, slow and deliberate, her feet making no sound on the wet asphalt. My breath fogged the window as I fumbled with the keys, desperation rising. Then I heard it, soft, almost a whisper, coming from outside the truck. Words I couldn't understand, like a chant or a lullaby. The woman was right outside my door now, face inches from the glass. Her eyes bore into me, hollow pits of blackness. I could feel something in the air, cold, oppressive, like the weight of death itself. Suddenly, The radio sputtered to life with static, and through the noise, a voice whispered, "You should not have stopped." I screamed and hit the horn as hard as I could, but no one came. I tried again to start the engine. The truck roared back to life. Without thinking, I slammed it into gear and peeled away, tires screeching on the wet road. As I sped through the fog, I caught one last glimpse of the woman standing in the rearview mirror. She was gone, but the road ahead was still swallowed by mist. When I finally reached a gas station in Columbus, hours later I was shaking uncontrollably. The attendants said the fog had only just rolled in an hour before. I told them my story. They exchanged looks, but didn't say much. The local sheriff's office told me about a woman who had disappeared on that stretch of highway decades earlier. They said she was never found, and drivers sometimes report strange sightings near Riverside. Since then, I avoid that route entirely, especially at night. There are things out on the road that no one talks about, and that night I met one of them. It's not just a job anymore, it's a test of nerve and sanity. And some roads, they're better left alone. Story the end.
Story number 11.
It was a run like any other, or so I thought. The kind of trip I'd done hundreds of times before, hauling freight across the country. But this one, this particular night, etched itself into my memory with a kind of cold permanence that nothing else ever had. I'm Jason, been driving trucks for over a decade, and the road is my life. I've seen bad weather, near accidents, and the occasional weird thing on the side of the highway. But what I'm about to tell you, well, it's something else. I picked up a load in Tulsa, Oklahoma late in the afternoon, a refrigerated trailer full of perishable food headed for a warehouse in Cleveland, Ohio. It was a straight shot north and east, mostly interstate highways and some back roads. I was ahead of schedule and feeling good, the cab warm with the heat cranked up because it was early October and the nights were already chilly. After about 7 hours of driving, I pulled into a rest stop somewhere outside of Springfield, Missouri around 11 p.m. to get some coffee and stretch my legs. The lot was almost deserted, except for a couple of trucks parked at the far end. The air smelled like rain was coming, the kind of heavy dampness that settles in when a storm is near. As I was walking back to my rig, I noticed something off in the shadows near a row of trees bordering the parking lot. A figure was standing there. A man, or at least I thought so at first. He was tall, dressed in an old trench coat that looked way out of place for the season, and his face was hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat pulled down low. What really caught my eye was how still he was. No movement at all, just standing there like a statue. I glanced at him for a second, and he suddenly turned his head toward me. Slow, deliberate, but I couldn't see his eyes, just a dark shadow under the hat. I called out, "You all right, man?" But he didn't answer or move. I started to get an uneasy feeling, so I kept walking and climbed back into my truck. As I started the engine and pulled out of the lot, I noticed him step out onto the road, just standing at the edge of the shoulder. I didn't stop. Something about the way he stood made my stomach turn. When I looked back in my mirrors, he was gone. The radio started crackling, static filling the cab as I adjusted the dial. It felt like the noise was getting louder, almost like a whisper behind the static, a faint voice barely audible, saying something like, "Help me." Or maybe, "Don't look back." I shrugged it off, thinking I was just tired and hearing things. The miles rolled by under the headlights as I drove through the night, the road narrowing and the trees growing thick on either side. I was keeping my eyes peeled, but everything looked normal, or so I thought. Then, somewhere near a curve in the road by a patch of forest, the truck suddenly shuddered and the engine cut out. No warning, just silence and the truck rolling to a stop on the shoulder. I tried to restart it, nothing. Dead. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. The cold night air hitting me like a wall. The silence was absolute except for the occasional rustling of leaves. I checked under the hood. Everything looked fine, no leaks, no smoke, no signs of anything wrong. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, heavy, deliberate steps on gravel. I swung the flashlight wildly, but all I could see was darkness. No sign of anyone. A chill ran down my spine. I was about to get back into the truck when the trailer doors behind me slammed shut with a thunderous bang, the sound echoing through the trees. I jumped, heart pounding, and ran back to the cab, locking every door and window. The temperature inside the cab dropped suddenly. Frost started to form on the windows, and my breath came out in thick clouds. The radio erupted in static, then a high-pitched scream that pierced the silence and rattled my nerves. I covered my ears, trying to shut it out. After a few seconds, everything went quiet again, but the feeling of dread lingered. I hit the ignition, and the engine roared back to life. I peeled out onto the highway, the truck shaking under me as I pushed the pedal to the floor. But the whispers on the radio came back, growing louder, more desperate. "Help me, please," the voice pleaded, broken and hollow. I kept driving, not stopping until I reached the warehouse in Cleveland, where I dumped the load and booked a motel room. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing tapping on the trailer doors, soft and rhythmic, like fingers drumming. The next day, I called the dispatcher to report the truck issue. They told me a strange storm had passed through the area overnight, knocking out power lines and causing multiple vehicle failures on that stretch of highway. I looked into it later and found something even worse. Years ago, a trucker on that same route disappeared under mysterious circumstances. The story was that he pulled over for what looked like a hitchhiker on a cold October night and was never seen again. His rig was found abandoned on the side of the road, engine cold, trailer doors open, but no sign of him. People say the highway is cursed, that the forest holds spirits of those lost on the road. I don't know if I believe in ghosts. But after that night, I don't pick up hitchhikers, and I don't stop if I see someone standing by the side of the road. Sometimes, when I'm parked alone at night, I still hear that tapping on my trailer doors and the faint whispers and the static. Some things you don't want to meet on the road, especially when you're alone. Story the end.
Story number 12.
Given the length and detail requested, I'll begin writing the complete story below. Please allow me a moment to craft it fully. I was driving through the night like I'd done thousands of times before, the hum of the engine my only companion as I rolled across the empty highways of the Midwest. My name's Carl, and I've been a trucker for over 20 years. I've faced storms, near misses, and more strange occurrences than I can count. But this trip, the one that started out like any other, ended up being the most terrifying experience of my life. I'd picked up a load of electronics from a warehouse in Kansas City, bound for a small distribution center in Cleveland. It was early October, and the nights were already cold and creeping toward the kind of darkness that seems to swallow everything whole. I was cruising east on I-70, the miles melting beneath my tires as the radio played some old country tunes. I liked this stretch of road. It was quiet and straight, nothing complicated. Perfect for clearing my head after a long day of driving. I pulled off at a rest area near a tiny town called St. Clairsville, Ohio, just after midnight. The lot was nearly empty except for a couple of rigs parked under the yellow glow of flickering street lamps. I needed a break. My legs were stiff and I needed a cup of coffee. The night air smelled faintly of rain and earth. I grabbed a hot cup from the vending machine and leaned against the wall, taking a long sip. That's when I saw him. A man standing just beyond the parking lot's edge in the shadows near a cluster of trees. He was tall, thin, wearing a long dark coat and a hat pulled low over his eyes. He didn't move, just stood there perfectly still, watching. Something about him set my nerves on edge. I didn't recognize the man, and that wasn't unusual. Plenty of folks wander rest stops late at night, but the way he stood so rigid as if carved from stone was unsettling. His face was hidden in shadow. I called out, "You need a hand?" "You need a hand?" But he didn't respond. I decided to get back to my truck. No sense tempting trouble. As I approached, I glanced back once more. The man was gone. I got into the cab, locked the doors, and started the engine. The road stretched ahead, dark and empty except for the highway lights. The radio was quiet except for static crackling in the background. I tuned through the channels, searching for chatter, but heard nothing but white noise. About 15 minutes down the road, near a curve surrounded by thick forest, I saw her. A woman, standing at the edge of the road, dressed in white, her long hair blowing gently despite the still night. She looked fragile, lost. My first instinct was to slow down and ask if she needed help, but something told me not to stop. When I glanced back after passing her, she was gone. I shrugged it off as fatigue. Truckers see strange things at night all the time, headlights in the woods, figures in the fog, Most of the time, it's tricks of the light or tired eyes. But then the truck began to sputter. The engine coughed and died right on the shoulder. I tried restarting, nothing. The cab went silent except for the faint rustling of leaves and the cold wind outside. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out. The night was unnervingly still. Then I heard it, footsteps approaching from the trees behind me. Slow, steady, deliberate. I spun the flashlight beam wildly but saw only empty darkness. Suddenly, the rear trailer doors slammed shut with a deafening bang that echoed through the night. My heart leapt to my throat. I ran back to the cab and locked the doors, fumbling to restart the engine. It roared back to life, but the temperature inside the cab dropped sharply. Frost appeared on the windows, and my breath came out in thick clouds. The radio crackled violently, then a whisper hissed through the static. "Help me." The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I slammed the gear into drive and peeled back onto the highway, the wheels spinning on the wet asphalt. As I drove, the whispering voice continued, growing louder and more desperate. I looked in the rearview mirror and thought I saw a pale face pressed against the trailer window, eyes wide, mouth open in a silent scream. I slammed on the brakes, heart racing, and stopped under a streetlight in a nearby town. I jumped out and ran around the trailer, no one there. I shook my head, telling myself I was losing it. The next morning, I reported the engine failure and strange noises to the dispatcher. They told me there had been no weather or mechanical issues reported on that stretch. Curious, I researched the area later and uncovered a chilling story. Decades ago, a young woman had vanished on that very stretch of highway. She'd been hitchhiking and disappeared without a trace. Several truckers reported hearing a woman's voice on the radio at night, begging for help. I never drove that route again. Sometimes when I park alone and the night is dead silent, I hear soft tapping on my trailer doors. And I swear, if I listen closely, I can still hear her voice in the static. Some things you don't want to meet on the road. Some things you can't outrun. Story the end.
Story number 13.
It was somewhere past midnight when Hank pulled off Interstate 40 and into the gravel lot of a rundown truck stop near the border of New Mexico and Arizona. He'd been driving for close to 14 hours, chasing the last hours of his logbook before hitting his federal limit. The rain had turned to sleet, and the windshield wipers squeaked in protest with every pass. He hadn't passed another vehicle in over an hour, and even the CB radio had gone eerily quiet. Out here, it was just Hank, his rig, and the endless black stretch of highway. The truck stop wasn't much, just a single flickering neon sign that read, "Eat, Fuel, Rest," accompanied by a squat building with only 2 lights on inside. The diesel pumps looked ancient, and the lot was nearly empty, save for a single beat-up Kenworth parked way off toward the dark edge of the property. Hank swung his Freightliner in as close to the door as he could, killed the engine, and sat for a moment, staring at his reflection in the side mirror. He rubbed at his eyes. He was no rookie. 21 years on the road had given him nerves of steel and a gut that usually knew when something was off. But tonight, he felt a knot in his stomach that he couldn't explain. Maybe it was the cold, maybe it was the silence, or maybe it was the way the rain hadn't touched the other truck, as if the weather had just decided to skip over it. Still, he shook it off, grabbed his jacket, and stepped down into the icy wind. The diner part of the truck stop smelled like old grease, burnt coffee, and something metallic he couldn't place. A waitress with a smoker's cough pointed toward a booth without looking up from her crossword. Hank settled in and ordered coffee. The place was dead silent, save for the hum of the freezer in the back and the ticking of an ancient wall clock that sounded much too loud in the stillness. As he sipped his coffee, he kept glancing outside through the big plate glass window. The other truck hadn't moved. No lights, no sign of a driver, just that rust-colored Kenworth sitting there, tail to the woods that ran along the edge of the lot. There was something unnatural about how still it was. Even the sleet seemed to avoid it. Hank figured the driver was sleeping off a double shift in the sleeper cab. Happens all the time. He paid and headed back out into the bitter cold, but as he stepped into the cab, his eyes caught something through the gloom, a shape near the Kenworth. A person? Maybe? No, it was gone too quick. Just a blur at the edge of the woods. He waited, squinting, heart rate ticking up a little, but nothing moved. Inside the cab, the heater groaned as it struggled to warm the cabin. Hank was just about to climb into the sleeper for a few hours of shut-eye when the CB crackled to life. Breaker. Breaker. The voice was distorted, like it was coming through water. You see it, don't you? Hank sat up straight, hand on the mic, but he didn't answer. It's watching you. Watching us both. Static. Hank grabbed the mic. Who the hell is this? Nothing. Just dead air. He switched channels. Nothing. Tried again. Still nothing. It was as if his entire system was dead, except that one strange burst of noise. He ran a diagnostic on the radio. Everything checked out fine. Then, a loud bang. The whole truck shook. Hank jumped, yanked open the curtain, and grabbed his flashlight. He opened the cab door and stepped down into the sleet again. The wind hit him like a wall, but there was no one around. He swung the beam toward the Kenworth. Nothing. Then back toward his trailer. Nothing. Just the sound of the wind and that damn ticking feeling in his gut. That's when he noticed the footprints. They were bare. Human. They started just beside the rear wheels of his trailer and led off toward the woods, thin, almost childlike, but the stride was wrong. Too long. Unnatural. He followed them with his eyes to the edge of the trees and saw something move again. Low to the ground. Fast. He didn't follow. He climbed back into the cab, locked the doors, and drew the blackout curtain. Another hour passed. Maybe more. Hank couldn't sleep. He kept replaying the radio message in his mind. Kept thinking about those footprints. The wind picked up, and he swore he could hear whispering in the whistling of it, though he told himself it was just exhaustion. Just after 3 a.m., the CB crackled again. Still watching Hank, his blood turned to ice. No one had said his name. He yanked the mic again. Who is this? The voice came back immediately, this time clearer. A man, whispering, Don't look. Don't open your curtain. If you see it, it knows. Hank sat frozen, hand clenched on the mic, sweat dripping down his back despite the cold. What the hell are you talking about? He hissed. Static. Then laughter. It wasn't human. It sounded like someone trying to be human, not getting it right, like a recording looped too many times. It rose and fell, cracking at the ends, and then fell silent. He pulled his curtain back an inch and immediately regretted it. The Kenworth was still there, only now it wasn't alone. A figure stood beside it, tall, lean, too tall. Its arms hung unnaturally low, nearly reaching the ground, and it was just standing there, not moving, not pacing, not breathing as far as he could tell. Its head turned suddenly, directly toward Hank's truck. He let the curtain fall and backed up into the sleeper, his breath shallow, his mind racing. He needed to get out of there. He climbed into the driver's seat, turned the key. The engine wouldn't start. Tried again. Nothing. Just a sluggish click, like the battery was drained. He checked the gauges. Everything read normal. Then he saw it, in his side mirror. The figure was right there, standing just outside the door. It didn't move, didn't knock, just stood there, inches away, staring directly at the cab. He didn't breathe, didn't blink. Time slowed, and then in the corner of his vision, he saw movement. Inside the cab. He turned slowly. There was a handprint on the inside of his windshield. Small, childlike, but long, bony fingers that dragged streaks down the glass. He nearly screamed, jumped back into the sleeper, and grabbed the crowbar he kept stashed under the mattress. The lights in the cab dimmed. The battery was fine. The lights just faded like something had sucked the power out of them. The whispering started again. Only this time it was coming from inside the sleeper. Right behind him. Hank turned, crowbar raised. Nothing. Just the darkness. Then a sudden slam against the back wall of the cab, hard enough to shake the whole truck. Hank bolted forward, desperate, turned the key again. This time, the engine roared to life. He didn't wait. Threw it into gear, tires skidding on wet gravel as he tore out of the lot, barreling back onto the interstate without checking mirrors, without looking back. He drove 15 miles, then 30, then nearly 60 without stopping. The sun began to rise behind him like a faint orange glow that felt like salvation. He didn't speak, didn't even turn the radio back on, just kept driving. Eventually, he stopped at a much larger travel plaza just outside Holbrook, full of light, full of people. And he sat there, engine idling, heart pounding. That was 3 years ago. He never went back to that stretch of I-40. He keeps a Bible in his cab now, though he's not the praying type. And he never, ever answers CB calls from strangers. Not anymore. Because sometimes, out there in the dark, Something else is listening. Something that knows your name. Something that's watching. Story the end.
Story number 14.
I was hauling a load of refrigerated goods out of Houston headed north to St. Louis. It was one of those long solo hauls I usually didn't mind. The open road, satellite radio, strong coffee, that was my world, and I liked it simple. It was early March, still cold at night in some places, and most of the trip had gone by uneventfully. But something happened the second night, somewhere deep in Oklahoma, that I still can't explain. I was supposed to stop just outside Tulsa to rest up, but I was making good time and figured I'd push on to a smaller truck stop I knew about 50 miles further along Route 69. Less traffic, easier parking, and a decent burger joint in the lot. It was already past 11 p.m. when I passed Tulsa, and the road ahead was pretty much empty, just black highway and occasional overhead signs. The first thing that threw me off was the sudden fog. 1 second it was clear, and the next it was like driving into a gray wall. My high beams didn't help, just lit up the thick mist like milk. I slowed down to about 30 and kept one hand on the CB, not that anyone else was around to talk. I'd driven through fog plenty of times before, but this felt wrong, heavy, like it had weight, and it was dead silent. No wind, no bugs hitting the windshield, just silence and fog. Then I saw it, something on the shoulder ahead. At first, I thought it was roadkill or maybe a stalled car, but as I got closer, I saw it was a person, standing motionless. I instinctively tapped the brakes and slowed to a crawl. The figure didn't move. I turned on the hazard lights, leaned over, and rolled the window down a crack. "Hey!" I yelled. "You all right out there?" The figure didn't respond. I could barely make out that it was wearing dark clothes, maybe a hoodie, and seemed to be looking straight at me. Something about the way it stood, still and rigid, gave me a bad feeling. I reached over to the passenger seat and grabbed the flashlight I keep for checks and leaned out the window, shining it toward the figure. There was no face. Not like it was too dark to see. I mean, there was no face at all. Just smooth, pale skin where eyes, nose, and a mouth should have been. I slammed the window up and floored it. My rig roared back to speed, fishtailing slightly on the mist-slick pavement, and I didn't stop driving for another 30 miles. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a trick of the fog, a mannequin, something from a prank video. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen. That wasn't a person. Not anymore. I finally pulled into that truck stop just outside McAllister, my nerves shot. The place was almost empty, just a couple other rigs parked under the harsh halogen lights. I cut the engine and sat there for a long minute, gripping the steering wheel, trying to slow my breathing. Eventually, I climbed out and walked into the diner, trying to shake off the chill crawling up my spine. The waitress, an older lady named Marlene, who'd been working there since the 80s, gave me a curious look when I sat down. "You all right, Han? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Just fog," I muttered. "Damn near ran over a weirdo standing on the shoulder." She pursed her lips and poured me a cup of coffee. "Was it on 69, around mile marker 242? I stopped stirring my cream. "Yeah, why?" Marlene hesitated, then leaned in a little closer. "You're not the first trucker to say something like that. There's been stories for years. Folks talk about seeing a man, or something like a man, standing in the fog. No one's ever seen it move. Just stands there, silent." I stared at her, goosebumps rising on my arms. "Sometimes," she continued, her voice dropping to a whisper, "they say it gets closer each time you see it. Like it follows you, a little further up the road each time, but most of the time it just stares." "But it didn't have a face," I said quietly. Her hand froze around the coffee pot. Then she turned and walked back behind the counter, not saying another word. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed in my cab with the curtains pulled and every light on, the engine idling. I checked my mirrors every few minutes, half expecting to see something standing out in the dark just at the edge of the lot. But nothing came. The fog had lifted by morning, and the sun was bright and clear like none of it had ever happened. I tried to brush it off, tried to move on. Finished the haul in St. Louis, took a couple days off, and didn't mention it to anyone. But a few weeks later, I took another job. This one was from Denver back to Dallas, a route I'd done dozens of times. On the second night, driving through the Panhandle, I saw the fog again. Same sudden wall of it, same dead silence. And there it was again. standing on the shoulder, exactly the same height and build. Only this time it was closer to the edge of the road. Closer than before. I didn't slow down. I swerved into the other lane and sped up, watching it shrink in the mirror until the fog swallowed it. I didn't stop driving that night. Taraf, I made it to Dallas by morning, my hands shaking and my head pounding. I started keeping a bat under the seat. I installed cameras around my cab. I even started praying again, something I hadn't done since I was a kid. But it kept happening. Not every trip, not even every month, but enough that I stopped taking night routes altogether. The figure was always the same. Face. No face. Standing in fog. Closer each time. The worst was last year. I was forced to take an overnight route due to a schedule delay. It was supposed to be a quick haul from Amarillo to Albuquerque. I tried everything to avoid it, said I was sick, truck had issues, but dispatch wasn't having it, so I hit the road just after sunset. The fog started just before midnight. I knew the stretch. Empty desert road, no towns for 50 miles. I slowed down already, dreading what I'd see. And there it was, standing not on the shoulder, but in the middle of the road. I hit the brakes so hard the rig screeched and jackknifed slightly, but I managed to stop before hitting it. My headlights lit it up perfectly. Still. Pale. Faceless. It didn't move. I stared at it through the windshield, heart hammering in my throat. For the first time, I noticed something I hadn't before. Its arms. They weren't hanging naturally. They were stiff, straight down like a corpse. I reached for the bat, but something told me not to get out. I threw the rig in reverse, backed up a good 100 feet, then took the ditch to go around it. My trailer rocked and scraped, but I didn't care. I just needed to get past. In the rearview mirror, I swear I saw it turn its head. I finished that run barely and called off for weeks after. I even considered quitting trucking altogether. But it's all I know, and bills don't wait. So I went back. Day runs only. No back roads. Nothing rural. I figured if I just stuck to the rules, I'd be fine. Then a few months ago, I heard a story from another driver at a rest stop in Missouri. He was a seasoned guy, retired military, tough as nails, but his hands were shaking as he talked. He said he saw a figure in the fog on a night run through Kentucky. Said it stepped into the middle of the road. No face, no sound. He swerved and wrecked into a ditch. By the time he crawled out of the cab, dazed and bleeding, the figure was standing just feet away, unmoving. Then, finally, it moved. It tilted its head sideways like a dog studying something. Then it turned and walked backward into the fog. I didn't tell him my story. I didn't need to. Sometimes when I'm on a long stretch of road, even in the daylight, I still think about it. I wonder if it's still out there, watching trucks pass in the fog. I wonder how many others have seen it, but said nothing. But mostly I wonder if one day it won't just stand there, if one day it'll step up to my cab, knock on the door, and I'll be forced to open it. Story the end.
Story number 15.
It was the kind of cold that settled into your bones. The highway stretched flat and empty under a pitch-black sky, lit only by the faded white of the lane lines and the dull red glow from my dashboard. I was hauling a load of building materials from Tulsa to Flagstaff. Nothing special, just another routine trip. The dispatcher told me I had a tight delivery window, so I had to drive through the night. I'd done it 100 times before, but this run felt different from the start. It started just west of Gallup, New Mexico. I'd been driving for hours, caffeine in my veins and classic rock murmuring through the radio. I wasn't expecting trouble until my headlights caught a figure standing on the shoulder. Not walking. Standing. Facing the road, directly into my lights, motionless. I barely had time to react, swerving just enough to keep from clipping them. I got a better look as I passed. A man in a dirty gray coat, long matted hair, his face pale and hollow-eyed like he hadn't eaten or slept in days. The figure never flinched. I checked my mirrors. Nothing. No silhouette in the red wash of my taillights. He should have been there. He should have been in the road behind me. But it was empty. I slowed down, pulled onto the shoulder, and grabbed my flashlight. Against my better judgment, I got out to check. The cold hit me hard, sharper than it had been minutes ago. The wind howled low and steady across the dark desert. I walked up and down the shoulder, maybe 20 yards in each direction. No footprints. No man. By the time I got back in the cab, I was shaking. I chalked it up to fatigue. Night driving can mess with your head. I told myself I was seeing things. I told myself I was tired, maybe too much caffeine. I was lying to myself. An hour later, I was deep in the desert. No towns, no cars, just endless dark and that humming vibration you feel through the wheel. I was starting to nod off when the radio cracked. Not the usual static either. It was sharp, like metal scraping against metal, and then a voice came through. "Stop the truck," it was whispered. Not broadcast quality, more like someone had leaned into the mic and hissed it through gritted teeth. It lasted only a second, and then silence. The station came back like nothing had happened, Tom Petty singing about running down a dream. I stared at the CB. Nobody had called me. Not on the trucker frequency. It wasn't a dispatcher, and it wasn't another driver. I reached to switch the frequency, and the knob shocked me, like a real jolt. Enough to make me yelp. My fingers burned for a moment where they touched it. I kept driving. Somewhere after the Arizona border, I noticed something else. My odometer had stopped. I hadn't reset the trip meter, but it had frozen. It had been at 428.6 for a while now, and the GPS was no better. It said I was still in Gallup, even though I'd passed the state line 30 minutes ago. I was on Highway 40, I knew that for sure, but nothing around me looked familiar. No mile markers, no road signs. The desert looked too dark, flat where it should have been hilly. Even the sky was wrong. No stars, no moon, just blackness above. Then my headlights caught another figure. This time it was in the middle of the road. I hit the brakes hard. The truck groaned and fishtailed slightly. I came to a stop maybe 20 feet in front of him. Same man, same gray coat, same dead eyes. Only now he was smiling. Wide and unnatural, like his mouth had been carved into his face. I reached for my air horn. Nothing. Dead. I flicked the high beams. The light hit him and his mouth fell open. But he didn't move. And then he disappeared. I blinked and he was just gone. Not like he walked away. He was there one moment and vanished the next. Not a trace on the asphalt. I tried to drive again, but the truck wouldn't budge. Transmission locked. Engine humming. Gears frozen. I put it in park, then reverse, then neutral. Nothing. The truck wouldn't respond. The radio was dead. GPS frozen. Phone had no service. That's when I saw the lights in the distance. Dim orange dots, maybe half a mile ahead, bobbing slightly like lanterns swinging in the wind. A rest stop? A diner? Maybe a place to call for help? I started rolling forward slowly. As soon as I passed where the figure had stood, the truck unlocked. It drove like nothing had happened. The lights grew closer, but they didn't seem fixed to anything. Just a cluster of glowing orbs floating above the desert floor. I slowed again, more cautious than ever. Then I realized they weren't lights at all. They were eyes. Eyes reflecting the headlights. Dozens of them. Some low to the ground, others higher up like they belonged to something tall. They didn't move. They just stared. I kept driving, hands white-knuckled on the wheel. I didn't stop. I didn't blink. After maybe 10 minutes, the eyes faded into the dark. My GPS blinked back to life. My odometer updated. The radio resumed as if it had never skipped a beat. I passed a sign that read Holbrook, 34 miles. I don't remember getting to the truck stop. I just remember the fluorescent lights washing over the parking lot and the sound of other engines idling. I parked and shut everything off. My hands were trembling. I went inside and poured myself the worst cup of coffee I'd ever had. Didn't matter. I needed something warm. There were a couple other drivers inside, sitting at the counter, making small talk with the cashier. I must have looked like hell because one of them asked if I was okay. I said I'd seen something out there. The cashier, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes, looked up. "On 40?" she asked. I nodded. She turned pale. One of the drivers shifted uncomfortably. The other one glanced at the clock and muttered, "Not again." They told me a story then, not one they share often. Apparently, drivers have reported strange things between Gallup and Holbrook for years. Weird figures on the road, radios going dead, lights in the desert. A few drivers even disappeared. Just stopped answering dispatch, trucks found abandoned days later, engines off, trailers intact, cab doors hanging open. No one could explain it. One old-timer at the end of the counter said he'd seen the gray-coated man before too. Twice in his 30 years. "Don't stop for him," he said. "Don't look him in the eyes. That's how he gets in." I asked what he meant by that. The man just sipped his coffee and said, "You'll see." I didn't sleep that night. I stayed in the truck, doors locked, cab light on. Every shadow made me twitch. When I finally pulled out the next morning, everything looked normal again. Blue skies, dry road, radio humming like usual. I delivered my load in Flagstaff and told the receiver I'd be staying local for a while. That was 2 years ago. I haven't driven that stretch of road since. I've had nightmares, though, always the same. Driving through the desert, sky black, road endless, the figure in gray standing just ahead. Sometimes he smiles, sometimes he speaks, and sometimes I wake up and he's standing at the foot of my bed. Story the end.
Story number 16.
Carl Mendez had been a trucker for nearly 2 decades, the kind of man who preferred asphalt over carpet and diesel over perfume. He liked the solitude, the rhythm of the road, and the silence between towns that most people would find unnerving. Carl had hauled everything from refrigerated produce to machine parts and even a carnival's worth of rides once. There wasn't a highway in the lower 48 he hadn't driven. But nothing ever unsettled him until the job he picked up one late November night just outside Little Rock. The load was a standard dry van, locked and sealed. Paperwork said it was miscellaneous estate goods headed for a storage unit in rural Utah, some estate dispute Carl didn't care to get involved in. The money was good, suspiciously good, but it wasn't the first time someone overpaid for a discreet haul. The guy who handed him the paperwork at the terminal was clean-cut, formal, and tight-lipped. He didn't smile, didn't explain anything, just handed Carl a clipboard and said, "Don't open the trailer, not under any circumstances. Drop it exactly where the directions say, and call the number on the receipt when you're done." Carl thought the guy might have been military, or maybe one of those off-the-books government types. But again, not his business. He was paid to haul, not ask. He left the yard around 7 p.m., planning to drive through the night and stop somewhere around Amarillo to sleep in the cab. Everything was normal for the first few hours. The rig handled fine, traffic was light, and the late autumn weather held steady. He had his usual thermos of coffee, the radio on low, and the GPS whispering directions in its robotic voice. Just before midnight, Carl was cruising through a particularly empty stretch of highway when the CB crackled to life, even though he hadn't heard a single transmission in hours. "You're pulling something heavy tonight, huh? 7 to 3? Carl reached for the mic and paused. He was on channel 19, open, but no one had ID'd themselves. He keyed the mic. "Say again?" Silence. Then after a few seconds, "Better keep your doors locked, 7-3. That thing don't like to be moved." Carl frowned and glanced into the side mirrors. The road behind him was empty, no headlights, nothing on the shoulder. He flipped through a few other channels but got only static. Shrugging it off as a prank, he clicked the radio off and kept driving. That was the first time it spoke. He was coming up on a way station outside Shamrock, Texas, when he heard it. A low, dragging noise from the back of the trailer, like something being scraped slowly along the metal floor. Then came the knocking, 4 dull thuds spaced evenly apart. It wasn't wind or road noise. It was inside. Carl sat up straight, his skin tightening. He turned the music down and waited. The knocking didn't come again. He slowed as he passed the way station. It was closed for the night, and the building was dark. He pulled into the rest area just beyond it, parked the rig in a well-lit spot, and stepped out to inspect the trailer. The seal was still intact, undisturbed. The lock hadn't been tampered with, but something felt wrong. The air around the back of the trailer was colder. Not just chilly, but sharp and unnatural, like standing in front of an open freezer door. He touched the metal door. It burned his palm with cold despite the mild Texas night. He climbed back into the cab, locking the doors behind him. The next few hours passed uneventfully. He pushed through Amarillo and considered stopping, but something told him to keep driving. He didn't like how that knock sounded, how it had rhythm like it was intentional. He'd heard tires blow, axles groan, and pallets shift, but this wasn't any of those. Then, somewhere near Tucumcari, New Mexico, the dreams started. He didn't even remember falling asleep. One moment he was driving, and the next he was in the sleeper, drenched in sweat, gasping. The curtains were drawn, the cab lights off, and the rig was moving. Except he wasn't driving. He scrambled into the front seat. The truck was in neutral, coasting. He was on a 2-lane desert road, miles off the interstate. There were no headlights behind him, no sign of other vehicles. The road was cracked and narrow, surrounded on both sides by endless desert scrub and low hills. No GPS signal. His phone had no bars. Carl brought the rig to a halt, shifted into park, and stepped out. The silence was deafening. Even the wind was still. He checked the trailer again. The seal was still there, but the trailer door had dents in it now, fresh ones, small, like from the inside. Something had hit it hard, multiple times. He got back into the cab and tried the GPS again. Nothing. He turned the CB back on and flipped through channels. On channel 23, someone whispered, "Don't stop. Don't let it catch up." That was enough. He threw the rig into gear and started driving back the way he came. Except he wasn't sure he had come that way. The road felt unfamiliar, like it was being built in front of him. The hills didn't look right, and the horizon never changed. Every mile felt like a loop of the last. At one point, his headlights caught something off the side of the road. It looked like a man, or maybe a mannequin, just standing there in the desert brush, tall, dressed in black, with arms too long for its body. He only saw it for a second, but it was facing the truck, watching. Carl didn't stop. He didn't even slow down. He drove for what felt like hours until finally, blessedly, the GPS came back to life with a chime. His position blinked on the map, and the voice calmly instructed him to make a U-turn and proceed toward Gallup. As he turned the rig around, he glanced in the rearview mirror. There were handprints on the inside of the trailer door. Smudged, long-fingered. Dozens of them. He floored it, determined to drop the damn load and never look back. The rest of the route was more normal, at least for a while. He pulled into the delivery site around 4:30 the next morning, a fenced-off lot behind a self-storage facility near Bluff, Utah. The directions had said to back into a specific unit and leave the trailer. There was no one there to receive it. As he unhooked the rig and stepped down to lock the trailer wheels, he heard it again. Knocking. But this time it was frantic. He froze. The noise wasn't rhythmic now. It was desperate. Banging, scratching, as if something inside had realized it was being left behind. Carl didn't wait. He locked the trailer, climbed into the cab, and drove 2 blocks down before pulling over to call the number from the paperwork. It rang once before a man answered. "Mendez?" "Yeah," Carl said, voice shaking. "It's done. I dropped it." "Good. Forget the route. Don't go back. Your payment will clear in 24 hours. Don't call this number again." The line went dead. Carl sat there staring at his dashboard, heart pounding. After a long while, he turned the rig around and drove to a truck stop 10 miles away, parked under the floodlights, and didn't sleep for the next 36 hours. 3 days later, he was in a diner outside Flagstaff when a news story came on the TV mounted above the counter. The volume was low, but the headline caught his eye. "Storage facility fire under investigation. Officials baffled by lack of fire damage." The footage showed the very lot he'd delivered to. Charred ground, scorched fence, and melted asphalt, but the storage units were untouched. Not even smoke damage. Fire officials interviewed by the reporter said it looked like the fire came from below ground and stopped just outside the unit. Carl didn't finish his coffee. He left cash on the counter and walked out. He took only refrigerated loads after that. Reefer trailers with loud, consistent background noise that masked anything he didn't want to hear. If a client couldn't tell him what he was hauling, he didn't take it. And he changed his CB handle too, because every once in a while, he still hears whispers when he's driving late at night, alone on long stretches of road. Sometimes they say his name, and sometimes they just knock. Softly. From the trailer behind him. Story. The end.
Story number 17.
I've driven trucks for almost 25 years, mostly up and down the Midwest. Indiana to Illinois, sometimes as far as the Dakotas or Kansas when the money's good. It's a lonely job, but I've always been okay with that. There's something calming about the hum of the tires on the road, the glow of the dash, the cold cup of gas station coffee keeping me company. I've seen all kinds of things on the road. Drunk drivers, wrecks, even a couple of tornadoes. But nothing ever got under my skin the way what happened back in 2019 did. It started like any other job. A long-haul route taking me from Fort Wayne, Indiana to a drop point outside Billings, Montana. A couple of pallets of industrial equipment. Nothing hazardous, nothing fragile. It paid well because it was a straight-through job. No overnight stops, just a rest break halfway through, then keep going. I had a tight window. If I didn't make the delivery by 6 a.m. the second morning, I'd lose the bonus. I left Fort Wayne around noon. The weather was decent, a little overcast, and cold for mid-April. I made it through Illinois, then Iowa, and hit South Dakota by 10 p.m. I was starting to feel it then, the fatigue creeping in. I pulled into a rest area just outside Mitchell, filled the tank, grabbed some food from the vending machines, and laid down in the sleeper berth. I remember waking up to the sound of wind, not howling, just steady. My phone said it was around 2:40 a.m. I figured I'd gotten just enough rest to push through the rest of the way. I started the rig, checked the tires and the cargo straps, and got back on the road. Route 90 stretched out ahead, black and empty, with only the occasional glow of distant farmhouses or the reflection of deer eyes off to the sides. About 40 minutes later, I passed a tiny sign for a place called Harrow's Bend. Never heard of it. It didn't show up on Google Maps when I checked later either. It was one of those old highway towns, I guess. Just a couple of buildings half hidden behind trees and darkness. The fog came not long after. It wasn't a gradual buildup. 1 minute I could see for miles, and the next I was surrounded. My high beams turned it into a solid white wall. I slowed down, eased the rig to about 35 mph, both hands tight on the wheel. Fog like that isn't unusual in early spring, especially near rivers or open fields, but this fog was thick in a way that felt unnatural, like it was alive. Then the radio cut out. I always keep my CB on channel 19, just in case. It had been playing quietly in the background, a mix of chatter and weather reports, but suddenly it was all static. I turned the knob, tried a few other channels, but nothing came through. Dead air. Even my FM radio wasn't picking up stations. I chalked it up to interference and tried not to think too hard about it. But then I started seeing things. At first it was just flickers, shadows at the edge of the road, maybe deer, maybe wind blowing trees. But then I saw something clear, unmistakable. A man standing on the shoulder facing the road. He was wearing a coat. Long, dark, maybe wool or leather. His arms hung at his sides. I couldn't see his face. Not because of distance or fog. It was like his face wasn't there. Just darkness where it should have been. I swerved slightly, instinctively, and when I looked in the mirror, he was gone. Not walked away. Gone. I tried to calm myself down. Maybe I was tired. Maybe it was a trick of the fog and headlights. But deep down, my gut told me this wasn't a dream. I'd seen too much road to confuse fantasy from real. I kept driving. 10 minutes later, I saw something else. A shape in the road ahead, lying across the center line. Looked like a deer at first, but as I got closer, I realized it wasn't. It was a person. A woman, lying face down in the middle of Route 90. I hit the brakes hard, the trailer groaning behind me. My heart was pounding. I threw the hazards on and leaned forward, trying to get a better look. She wasn't moving. I considered calling 911, but I had no signal. No bars. That didn't make sense. This stretch usually had decent coverage. I grabbed the flashlight I keep near the door and climbed out. My boots hit the pavement with a crunch. It was dead silent. No wind now, no insects, nothing but fog and that body up ahead. I approached slowly. "Ma'am?" I called out. "You all right?" No answer. I stopped about 10 feet away. She was barefoot. Her hair was dark, matted. Her hands were twisted at strange angles beneath her. Something was off. I stepped closer and shined the flashlight on her back. That's when I saw it. She wasn't breathing. And worse, her spine, it didn't look right. It curved up too high, unnaturally bent beneath the skin like something was growing inside. I felt bile rise in my throat. I took a step back. She moved. Not stood up, not sat up, just twitched violently, like a seizure. Then her head turned slightly, not enough for me to see her face, but just enough to show she was alive, or something like it. I bolted back to the rig, threw the door open, climbed in, and locked it. I didn't even wait to get fully seated before I hit the gas. The truck groaned as it climbed back to speed. I checked the mirror once. The body was still lying there. But I swear I saw something standing near it. Something tall, thin, watching me go. The rest of the night was a blur. I drove for hours. No more signs, no more towns. Just the same 2-lane stretch and thick fog. I finally saw lights just before dawn. A gas station at the edge of a larger town. I pulled in, parked, and sat there with my hands still gripping the wheel. The gas station was open. I stumbled inside, pale, shaking. The cashier, a young guy in his 20s, looked at me like I'd crawled out of a grave. You all right, man? He asked. I didn't answer at first, just pointed outside. You seen the fog? He raised an eyebrow. What fog? I turned and looked out the window. Nothing. Just clear skies and sunlight. I checked my phone. Full bars. Weather app showed nothing unusual, no reports of accidents, no police alerts. I didn't tell the guy what I'd seen. What could I say? I saw a faceless man and a woman with a twisted spine lying in the road. They'd call the cops, maybe think I hit my head or had a stroke. I made the delivery just after 5:30 a.m., got the bonus. But I didn't feel any satisfaction, just tired. A week later, I met another trucker at a diner outside Kansas City. He was about my age, weathered, quiet. We struck up a conversation. I don't even remember how it started, but eventually he mentioned Route 90. He said, "You ever drive through South Dakota in the spring?" I froze. "Yeah, a couple weeks ago." He nodded slowly. "You ever hear of Harrow's Bend?" My stomach dropped. He looked me dead in the eye. "There's something out there, man. That fog, it's not weather, it's something else." I didn't ask what he meant. I already knew. Over the next few months, I started reading forums, quiet ones, not Reddit or Facebook, places only veteran truckers seem to know. I found post after post about Route 90, about people standing in the fog, about faces that weren't faces, about towns that didn't exist. One guy said he saw his dead wife standing in the middle of the road, smiling. Another said he picked up a hitchhiker who vanished from the passenger seat 10 miles later. No one had answers, only warnings. If you see the fog, don't stop. Don't look at the figures. Never get out of the truck. I've changed my routes now. I refuse to take anything through South Dakota. If a job sends me near Harrow's Bend, I decline it. Even if I'm broke. Because I know what I saw. I know what's out there. And I know I barely made it out. Story the end.
Story number 18.
I've never been one for telling stories, especially not scary ones. Trucking is a solitary life, and most of us out here on the road just keep our heads down and do the job. You learn early on not to dwell too much on things that go bump in the night, because if you start thinking about them, it becomes harder to be alone in the dark. But there's one thing that happened to me out on Route 50 through Nevada, what some call the loneliest road in America. And no matter how many years go by, I can't shake it. This was back in the summer of 2008. I was hauling a load of construction materials from Salt Lake City to Sacramento. I used to take the northern route through I-80, but I got word from a buddy that there was heavy construction near Reno causing big delays. I didn't want to waste half a day sitting in traffic, so I thought I'd try Route 50 instead. I'd only driven it once before, during the day. It was desolate, sure, but nothing I couldn't handle. I remember checking my watch as I passed Ely, Nevada. It was a little after 9 p.m. The sun had just dipped below the desert hills, casting everything in a deep orange glow. I figured I could make it another couple 100 miles before pulling off to rest. There weren't many places to stop along that stretch, but I remembered a small truck turnout just past Austin. Nothing official, no lights, no amenities, but enough room to park and get a few hours sleep. The first hour or so was uneventful. I had the radio on low, AM fuzz, mixed with the occasional country tune. Traffic was non-existent. I didn't pass a single car. It wasn't until just before midnight that I noticed something strange. Up ahead in the distance, my headlights caught what looked like a figure on the side of the road. That alone was weird enough. No one walks along that highway at night unless they're in real trouble. I slowed down, figuring maybe they were broken down and needed help. As I got closer, I saw it was a woman. She was standing perfectly still, not waving, not signaling for help. Just standing there, a few feet off the shoulder, looking directly at the truck. She was wearing what looked like an old-fashioned white dress. Not a sundress or anything you'd expect in the desert. This looked more like something from the 1940s. Long, almost down to her ankles, and stained at the bottom with dust and dirt. Her hair was long and dark, hanging over one side of her face. I slowed to maybe 30 miles an hour as I passed her. She didn't move, didn't look away. Her face was blank, no fear, no pleading, just hollow eyes following me as I rolled by. Something about her sent a chill down my spine. I kept driving. Checked my side mirror a minute later, and she was still there, standing in the same spot, still staring. Now, I've picked up my fair share of stranded folks in my time, part of the unwritten trucker code, but this didn't feel right. Something deep in my gut told me not to stop. I pressed on, trying to shake the image out of my head. Maybe 10 minutes later, I saw her again. Same white dress, same long hair, same blank expression, standing just off the road on the right-hand side. I slammed the brakes without thinking and skidded to a stop. My heart was pounding. I checked all my mirrors. There was no one on the road behind me. I opened the driver's side door and stepped down with my flashlight. I aimed it at where I thought I saw her, but she was gone. Just empty desert and sagebrush. I stood there for a long minute, scanning the area. The wind kicked up a bit, carrying dust and the dry smell of the desert. I climbed back into the cab and locked the doors, trying to laugh it off. Too many late nights, I muttered, rubbing my eyes. The road stretched on endlessly. The moon was high, casting silver light over everything. I started seeing signs for the turnout near Austin. Just a few more miles and I could get some rest. That's when I heard it. A knock. Not loud, just a soft, deliberate tap. It came from the passenger door. I jerked in my seat and looked over. Nothing there. I checked the side mirror. Empty road. I slowed the truck again, listening hard. My heart was racing so loud in my chest it drowned out everything else. I reached across and flipped on the cabin light. Still nothing. Then the knock came again, this time from the sleeper area behind me. I whipped around, flashlight in hand, and shone it into the bunk. Empty. I threw open the curtain, checked the floor, checked under the mattress. Nothing. I sat there in silence, staring at the back wall of my cab, trying to rationalize what I just heard. Then I smelled it. Rot. Like meat left out in the sun, like something had died. It filled the cab in seconds, thick and suffocating. I gagged and opened both windows, gasping for clean air. The wind rushed in, but the smell didn't fade. I pressed the accelerator, wanting to put distance between me and whatever the hell was happening. The smell persisted for miles, even with the windows down. Then it stopped. Just gone, as if it had never been there. I made it to the turnout near Austin around 1:30 a.m. I didn't see any other vehicles, just a dirt clearing beside the highway, the faint outline of the mountains in the distance, and that hollow quiet that only the desert can produce. I killed the engine, climbed into the sleeper, and pulled the curtain shut. I didn't bother with a blanket. I just lay there, eyes wide, listening to every creak and groan of the truck cooling down. I must have drifted off at some point because the next thing I remember was waking up in total darkness. The clock on my dash read 3:12 a.m. Then came the knock. 3 short raps. Right on the side of the sleeper. Inches from my head. I froze. Another knock. Slower this time. Then a third. I slid out of the bunk as quietly as I could, grabbed my flashlight, and crept to the front. I didn't turn on any lights, just peeked out the side window. She was standing there. The woman in white. She was closer now, maybe 3 feet from the cab. Her face was visible in the moonlight, pale, hollow-eyed, lips parted slightly like she was whispering something. Her hands hung at her sides, fingers twitching. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then she lifted her hand and pressed it against the glass. It left a smear, like ash or soot. I scrambled back, heart hammering. When I looked again, she was gone. I waited until dawn before I dared leave. When the first light crept over the horizon, I stepped outside. The smear on the window was real. A dark gray print, long fingers, almost claw-like. I wiped it with my sleeve and it smeared like charcoal. I drove the rest of the way in silence. No music. No CB. Just white knuckles on the steering wheel and my foot steady on the gas. When I finally rolled into Sacramento, I stopped at a diner on the outskirts of town. The waitress saw the look on my face and poured me a coffee without saying a word. After a while, I asked her if she knew anything about strange sightings along Route 50. Her face changed. "You see the woman?" she asked, almost whispering. I nodded slowly. "Lot of drivers have," she said. "Not all of them make it through. Had one fella stop in here last year, said she climbed into his rig while he was fueling up. Just opened the door and sat in the passenger seat and half like she belonged there. He didn't even notice until he was 10 miles down the road. Said she didn't say a word, just stared at him. Then she was gone." I didn't finish my coffee. I thanked her, left a tip, and got back in my truck. I've never taken Route 50 again. Doesn't matter if it's the only road open, I'll take the long way around. I still drive, still haul freight from state to state, but I keep my windows locked, never sleep on the shoulder. And when I see someone on the side of the road, I don't stop. Not anymore. Because I know there are things out there, things that don't belong. And some of them, like her, they're not looking for help. They're looking for a way in. Story the end.